And at the time, it was horrible to have to deal with my father and have to listen to him saying that he's paying thousands of dollars every semester and C's are not acceptable. But it taught me that failure was okay. And to tell you the truth, up to that point, I had always feared failure. And there was this desire to always be perfect and do the best because the thought of failure was just something that I thought would kill me. But I realized that it wasn't the end of the world, and it didn't kill me. And if anything, it gave me more strength in who I am and more of a belief in who I was as well, that I can try new things. And if it doesn't turn out perfectly, then it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And so when I started the ice hockey team, there was a point here, too, where it was a moment of, if I were to die tomorrow, what is the one thing I would regret? And for me, at that moment, at 19, it was that I never got a chance to play ice hockey. So I decided to start this team. And I remember being in Clark, and I printed up these flyers. And mind you, my brother was 1 year ahead of me, so he was here as an engineering major. And he's a very practical guy. He's very much like my father, very practical. And I told him that I was going to start this team. And he immediately was like, what are you doing? What are you doing wasting your time? You remember you got C's before. Freshman year, you're going to get C's again because you're going to waste your time. And I'm like, I think I learned how to study by now. I'm getting A's, don't worry about it. So I printed up these flyers, put it all around campus, and I had about 30 girls who showed up to these interest meetings. And my big philosophy, too, in life is, fake it till you make it. So I held all these meetings. They thought I knew what I was doing, and all these girls decided that they were going to play ice hockey. So fall comes along, the summer passes, these girls are all geared up, ready to play. We have our equipment, and of course, I was, as Dean Burgett said, I was in my Michelin Man outfit. And we get on the ice, and I was holding onto the wall because I didn't know how to skate. And one of the girls came over to me, and she just looked at me like she had just, like someone had just died in front of her. She's like, I thought you knew how to skate. I'm like, no. She goes, we thought you were like this hockey player, the way you were talking and managing this team. I'm like, you guys never asked, and I never lied. It just never came up. And they're like, but you can't even skate. I'm like, I realize that, but we're all going to learn together. Don't you understand why I had it as a stipulation that you didn't have to know how to skate to join the team? Because then I couldn't join my own team. So of course, we learned, and within a month, we were all decent skaters. And when you have equipment, it doesn't hurt when you fall. But again, that was a pivotal moment in my own life that really taught me, you can embark on these journeys, you can start these initiatives, and even if you don't know what you're doing necessarily, that you can learn as you go. So again, I was gaining this greater confidence in who I was. And as Dean Burgett said, I had this desire to go back to Afghanistan and do something. And I was here during my Take 5 year when 9/11 happened, and I write about it in the book, that I was going down to Hutch Hall. I had a chemistry class that morning, and I would emerge from that class in a new world, in a very different world. And I remember distinctly walking around campus and walking across the quad and seeing people in tears. And at that point still, I didn't know what was going on. I was in my classroom all morning. And I came here to the library and quickly logged on to CNN. And the site was actually not working. It was shut down because it was being flooded. And finally, I got it to work. And that's when I read about the attacks. And a part of me at that time kind of knew that Afghanistan was somehow involved in the picture. And at that time, my brother graduated. I was the only Afghan here on campus. And immediately there was fear that went through my own body. It was a matter of what would happen next. I think, when we look back at that moment, so much was unknown. And would I face hate crimes? Would someone attack me because I was Afghan, because I was Muslim? Would they blame me for it? And on top of that, I was a chemist. Who knew if the government all of a sudden had me on this list? And it sounds crazy and wild, but at the time, really looking back, we didn't know what would happen. And here I was again as this only Afghan, and didn't really even have that safe haven to fall back on. But eventually, I think as the dust settled, I was able to think a little bit more progressively in how I would go back and do something. And I was working as a research chemist at GE soon after graduating down in Troy, New York, in Albany. And my father was very happy. He was very happy that I was there and that I was doing chemistry. And he's an engineer. He's a very practical man. And so if you're going to major in chemistry, you're going to become a chemist. And if you major in engineering, you become an engineer. And I just wasn't happy. You know, I'd literally have to throw myself out of bed every morning just to get to work on time. And I was ready to just run out of there at 5 o'clock. And it really became a point that I just thought that it was now or never, that I was going to change the direction of my life or be here just to make my father happy for the rest of my life and be miserable in the process. So I decided to leave my job as a chemist, and I started organizing this team, you know, and reached out to friends and colleagues here still at Rochester and getting their advice on the work. And I left my job, packed my car full of my stuff, and drove home one day on a Friday afternoon. And my father wasn't home yet, and again, he didn't know about that I'd left. And he pulled into the driveway 2 minutes later and greeted me, and immediately, you know, was very excited to see me and happy to see that I was home for the weekend. And I told him that I was actually moving home, that I wasn't home just for the weekend, but that I had a group of girls who were coming from Kabul in a month. And he looked at me, didn't say a word, and walked inside the house. You know, meanwhile, I have my car full of boxes that I needed help with, and he didn't really help me that day. But I think it was very hard for him to see that I would be intentionally throwing myself in this struggle, you know, that I would embark something that was, he thought, very difficult, but also not practical. But I just believed so much in what I was doing that I wouldn't let him deter me. And if it didn't work, I could always go back to chemistry. But, you know, certainly if it worked, you know, look where it's come today, you know, where girls from these programs are getting recognized nationally and internationally. I have a book, you know, so I think things are very much unpredictable when you take on these ventures. But, you know, for those of you who are students here, and even those of you who aren't, I would definitely say, you know, find that passion that you have in life and move forward. And, you know, at times it might be difficult to overcome some of the obstacles, but just don't get deterred because you never know where it'll take you. And if you have enough of that passion and that drive, I think without a doubt that'll be enough to motivate you. So what I'll do is I'll show some of the video, the ESPN video. It's about 5-6 minutes, and then I'll talk a little bit about the book and then be happy to take some questions. But just to lead into the video, I actually got an email one day from ESPN. This is how it all happened. In 2005, I didn't play soccer, so I don't follow the World Cup. You know, I don't watch soccer at all on TV, and I can't even kick a ball, to tell you the truth. So I get an email from ESPN in 2005, and they read about my work, and they emailed me saying, hey, the World Cup is coming up next year. We'd love to go to Afghanistan and do some video on girls soccer. And my jaw dropped, first of all. I really had to read the email about 4 times just to make sure it was real. And of course, I didn't know the World Cup was even happening that year. So of course, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. Of course, I love the World Cup. Yeah, that's wonderful. Follow up. Yeah, come with us to Kabul. That's awesome. So I called her. We talked like the next day. I kind of needed a day to process it. And as you know, as luck would have it, they agreed to travel with me to Kabul and film a soccer clinic that I was holding. So just to give you background, in 2004, I ended up having, as Dean Burgett described briefly, I had a group of girls who came from Kabul. And they essentially made up the first girls soccer team in Afghanistan. And just to give you context, I was recruiting girls for the program. And the colleague that I was working with in Kabul emailed me saying that he couldn't find any teams in Kabul to recruit girls from. And I thought about it for maybe a minute or two, and I initially rationalized it using my American viewpoint of soccer. And I thought, well, girls aren't playing because there was war for 30 years, and there's a lack of a sports infrastructure. And that's why girls aren't playing soccer. But it wasn't until I went to Kabul 2 years later that I came to really understand that girls weren't playing soccer, not because there was a lack of an infrastructure, but it was because it wasn't appropriate for girls to play. And up to that point, there had never been a history of girls playing soccer in Afghanistan. And more traditionally, the sports that girls played were basketball and volleyball. So without really understanding what I was doing, I ended up essentially thrusting these girls into a position where they became the pioneers for soccer. And with that, though, too, they also faced the brunt of the backlash that would face them when they returned, because they were competing in this arena now where men had dominated and where men felt that it was only their space to play in. And to see girls playing, you know, at that point back in 2004, 2005 was a really big deal. And they didn't take it well at first, but it has changed today. And you read about it more in the book too, where, you know, these girls really had to step up to these men and say that it's fine for us to play. What's the big deal? And again, it just shows, you know, how courageous these young girls are back in Afghanistan. And, you know, unfortunately, these stories never get really aired in the news as well about the country.